Welcome into iUniversity Prep Cheat Codes, 8th grade Social Studies edition. We have a lot to get to. Poe Dameron right above me right here to help out today. So anyway, a lot to get to. Episode 11, The Age of Jackson. Native Americans, Nullification, and so much more. Jackson, oh my word, there was so much going on with this president, Andrew Jackson. And you will notice that he is on the $20 bill. So anyway. All right, so let's take a look at what you need to write down, and there is a lot. So pause the video and write down your 4 note cards for this episode. There is a lot. Write it all down. I promise you it will help. All right, now that you have unpaused and have written everything down, because you wrote everything down, because that's the right thing to do, because you're trying to learn here, not just watch a video. So anyway, let's take a look at some sample questions, because there are a lot of sample questions about Andrew Jackson and his presidency and the things that happened during his presidency. So let's just dive in. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Native Americans. And so here we have gold discovered on Cherokee land. Georgia annexed Cherokee land and abolished the Cherokee government and its laws. Cherokees refused to move from this land. One attempt to resolve this issue without violence involved which action? So as always pause the video before we go for the answers, and that way you can try to see if you can get them right before we go on. All right, so this part here is about really and truthfully, it's about the Indian Removal Act. The Indian Removal Act and all of the things that led up to the Native Americans being relocated from the American South to Oklahoma. American South to Oklahoma. Relocated from the American South to where? Oklahoma, absolutely. And so, what was done to try to avoid that, to try to keep that from happening? Well, the Cherokee Nation challenged Georgia's anti-Cherokee laws before the U.S. Supreme Court. They actually tried to do that. And guess what the Supreme Court said? They said, yeah, they can't kick you off their land. And yet they were. The Trail of Tears did happen. So what happened? Well, the president, Jackson, was like, Supreme Court, you can say whatever you want. These Native Americans, these Indians are being removed and sent to Oklahoma. So there you go. Finally, in the summer of 1842, after 7 years of desperate warfare, an agreement was reached with the few hundred remaining Seminoles, allowing them to live in southwest Florida. What was all this about? This was about Indian removal policies. Indian removal policies. Next question. In 1832, the Supreme Court ruled that Georgia did not have legal authority over the Cherokees living in the state. So this is the part that we just talked about. The Cherokees went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, yeah, Georgia can't kick you out. Well, President Andrew Jackson responded to this decision by doing what? Ignoring the ruling and allowing Georgia to evict the Cherokee Nation. That's exactly what happened. He was like, nah, I don't care what you say. Georgia, go ahead and do it. And this became known as the Trail of Tears. The relocation of American Indians in the 1830s. So once again, American South, all of this, American South, relocated to where? Oklahoma. What was a major reason for the federal government's involvement in the relocations depicted on this map? Why were they trying to get these Native Americans over to Oklahoma? Because the things that were on this land, here, bam, here, the stuff there was valuable, and that land was important. And so absolutely they wanted to kick off the Native Americans to acquire valuable land, valuable resources. Next question. And once again, there are a lot of questions on this whole Indian removal policy that happened in the United States during the age of Jackson, and just following the presidency of Andrew Jackson. So anyway, which shaded state was the main destination of American Indians forced to relocate as part of the Trail of Tears? Oklahoma. Absolutely. They were sent to Oklahoma. President Andrew Jackson supports. Do you see a trend on all these? Like, there's a lot of questions on the STAR test in the last 6 years from that are concerning the Indian Removal Act. So this is something you really need to know. President Andrew Jackson supports the removal of Cherokees from Georgia, and then something else happened, and the members of the Cherokee Nation are forced to walk the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma territory. What happened? Jackson ignored the Supreme Court. Yeah, that's what happened. It really happened. Anyway, All right, now let's move on to our next talking point. So that was the whole Indian Removal Act and all of the things that encompass that. Now let's talk about nullification. So here's what basically went down with nullification. The federal government passed tariffs prior to Jackson becoming president. So this was under a previous administration that required tariffs to be paid, taxes to be paid on goods that were manufactured outside of the United States. So if you were in South Carolina and you were growing things, but you weren't necessarily making things, so you might grow the cotton, but you didn't make the clothes. Well, people in the North made the clothes, all right? And so really what the intention here was for people in South Carolina to buy stuff from the North, from the United States of America. Well, it was cheaper for them to buy stuff from Europe, and so they wanted to buy stuff from Europe. Well, the tariffs that were passed made those goods imported from Europe not as cheap, not as inexpensive, to try to encourage people from the South to purchase manufactured goods from the northern part of the United States. So politically, this was great for the people in the North. People in the South were like, no, I don't like this. This is really, really bad. And specifically, the people in South Carolina were like, you know what? And this is where it comes under the presidency of Andrew Jackson. The people of South Carolina were like, you know what? That law that the United States has passed to charge tariffs for goods coming in from Europe, we're just going to ignore those, and we're going to say that is not a constitutional law, and we're not going to pay those tariffs. We're not going to pay those taxes. And so then there was a big battle about whether or not a state could say, all right, this law was passed by the federal government. Can a state just say, no, not going to do it? Great question. And so that led to this whole idea of nullification. Can a state nullify a law passed by the federal government? So, and it comes really down to the 10th Amendment, which says this: power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved for the states respectively, or to the people. Well, all of this played a major role in the nullification crisis. Okay? And eventually, South Carolina gave in, and all was well. There was kind of another law was passed with lower tariffs, so it kind of made it a little compromise for everybody. But anyway, this is a proclamation for President Andrew Jackson. I consider then that the power to annul a law of the United States assumed by one state incompatible, not able to be done with the existence of the Union, contradicted expressly by the letter of the Constitution. In other words, Andrew Jackson was saying a state cannot say that a law passed by the federal government is null, is not existent. Like, a state just can't do that. And this was all, of course, about the nullification crisis. And you'll notice there are quite a few questions about this. Primary question surrounding the nullification crisis: can a state overturn a federal law? Can they do that? Of course not. Once again, more nullification crisis here. The state has the right to, Speaker 1 says the state has the right to overrule an act by Congress. After all, the national government is supposed to share the power with the states. Speaker 2, you are wrong. The states the states do share power with the national government, but the Constitution says that the national government has supremacy. That is exactly what the argument was surrounding nullification. All right, now let's move on to the presidential elections that led to the election of Andrew Jackson. Now, this is fascinating stuff. So here's what happens. 1824, Andrew Jackson wins the popular vote and had the most votes in the Electoral College. However, he did not have a majority. He didn't have enough votes in the Electoral College. And so at that point, the election goes to the U.S. House of Representatives to see who is going to be the president. Well, in what became known as the corrupt bargain, the United States House of Representatives does not go with Andrew Jackson in 1824. They elect John Quincy Adams as president. So John Q. Adams becomes president 1824. So you kind of think, what's going on with Jackson? He's going to be like Poe Dameron, left on that planet there to die. Well, guess what? Just like Poe escaped, so did Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson actually formed the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party that we know today can trace its origins back to Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson forms a whole new political party and runs for election in 1828 and easily wins. So anyway, this is kind of a big deal with the election of Andrew Jackson. So anyway, Andrew Jackson won the most votes in the Electoral College, but did not have a majority under the 12th Amendment. The decision was turned over to the House of Representatives, which elected John Quincy Adams, and Jackson's supporters called Adams' election the result of a corrupt bargain. And so what was an effect of these events? Well, more people went out to vote because they were like, hey, this was kind of a ripoff. Like, our guy had the most votes and he didn't win. So anyway, and another thing about old President Jackson is not only did he like win in 1828, but then he was kind of like, you know what? I'm kind of a political outsider, kind of not like the rest of these politicians, those sorts of things. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to let my friends have all the important jobs, even though they are not qualified. And that was called the spoils system because he was like rewarding his political supporters for helping to get him into office by giving people jobs they really didn't deserve and didn't earn. So the spoils system. There you go. All right, which of the following is most associated with the formation of the Democratic Party? That's Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, 100%. During the 1830s, public servants and officials were widely perceived to be unqualified. This was the spoils system. What practice reinforced that perception? What was that? The President Jackson rewarding political supporters with appointments to desirable positions. That's exactly what he did because he's like, I'm the president. So anyway, here's your must-knows. Nullification, states trying to assert power over the federal government. Did not happen, but that was the intent of South Carolina. And then the Indian removal, just that Native Americans of the South were relocated to reservations on Oklahoma. I know it's a lot, but this stuff with the age of Jackson is so super duper important. You know, like $20 important. $20. Anyway, thanks so much. You guys have a wonderful day.